Alright, this is going to be a walkthrough of Activity 12-5, enabling and configuring shadow copies of shared folder settings. The book goes into very briefly about shadow copies, and those are, you could kind of think of them as online hot versions of previous versions of a file. Shadow copies, and it will save up to a certain amount based upon disk space, and you'll see that in a little bit as we go through and we set up a shadow copy for a particular volume. So starting from our desktop, we're going to go to our E drive, and I'm going to create a new folder and call it Shadow, which is number 3 of the walkthrough. I'm going to right click and say Properties, Sharing. We of course want to share this folder. It'll just be called Shadow. We'll say Permissions, give to everyone. And we want to give users full control. And we'll just double check. We have Shadow. It is shared. Security is everyone. Share permissions is full control for everyone. Okay, so we're ready to turn on our shadow copy feature, but first we're going to give it a file. We're actually setting up for previous versions, which will be 12.6. This will kind of restore from a previous version. So we're going to create a text file. We're going to call it test. We're going to edit it, and we're going to say well, we're not going to say anything. We're just going to create the file, and we're going to save it. I would say save. Here we go. Testing shadow documents. Okay. So we've saved that, and now that's on our machine. Now we're going to start shadow copies. And this is the properties of the volume itself. So selecting our volume that we want to create the shadow on. Notice here we have a tab, Shadow Copies, and our E is selected. We're going to say Enable and say Yes. We're going to take the defaults, and notice right here it says 100 megs. If we click Settings, at least 100 megs, create a shadow copy. We have plenty of space on this. It's going to max out at 500, but it's going to reserve a minimum of 100 megabytes up to 511. And hitting schedule is going to take us down to part 11, which it tells us at 7 o'clock and at 12 o'clock. That's what it means in part 11 where it says copies created at 7:11. We're going to create a new one, and this is what it means by what did it call it? The spin box. It just means a selector. We want to say daily, and we want to make it 4 p.m. That's what it means. So clicking OK, and if we hit schedule, we now have a third option. Whereas before we said 7 then 12, now we have 4 o'clock. And that's the one we want to use. So we'll say OK. And what that means is at 4 p.m. every day, a shadow copy is going to be created of all the files on the shares that are hosted on the eVolume. And in this case, it's going to be on eVolume. If we wanted to, we could specify a different volume. See here it says storage. In this case, it's going back to itself on a special portion of the disk of that volume. We could specify a different one. That's why the book warns, if you're going to do this on a high volume server like a file server, make sure you have an additional volume, an additional drive, or an additional RAID array, because it's going to be backing things up, making shadow copies to that special portion of the volume at a certain time, and if it's any time during the day, that could cause an adverse reaction on the I/O of that server, and it can make it unavailable to users, especially like I said, if it's a high usage server. So we'll just go and say OK. So our shadow is selected. We'll say OK. And we're going to go and we're going to edit the contents of our file. Shadow and text, and we'll select it. We're going to select all. We're going to hit the backspace key, or you can hit delete, does the same thing. And we'll say second shadow copy test. File and save. And that's the end of it. And this concludes our walkthrough of setting up and scheduling shadow copies.